Hi guys, so today's chapter is called the Bloodbottler in the BFG. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I's hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Bloodbottler!" But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and as wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked, except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozzcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I's jabbling to myself," answered the BFG. "Pifflefizz," shouted the Bloodbottler. "Bugswallop," he boomed. "You is talking to a human being, that's what I's thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. Yus, boomed the Bloodbottler. "I's guessing you has snitched away a human being and you brought it back to your bungle hole as a pet. So now I's winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. "There's no one in here," he stammered. Why, don't you leave me alone?" The Bloodbottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Puffling little swish figgler. Skimpy little bottlewort. Prunty little pogswuggler. I am now going to search the primroses." He meant premises. He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozzcumber, watching the two giants move as they moved down the cave. The Bloodbottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His face was round and squashy-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat. His mouth was huge. It was spread right across his face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying on top of one another. Craggly yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit rained down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Bloodbottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was now examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog, Swoggler," cried the Bloodbottler. Soon the BFG would be coming back, Sophie told herself, but he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Bloodbottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half of the dozen of the seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber large enough for her to crouch in, so as long as she rolled herself into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to keep her from being eaten? The Bloodbottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. At any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Bloodbottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at this bare table. "Sophie, where is you?" He thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table, so where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this is the filthy, rotsome gubblage you is eating," boomed the Bloodbottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rubbish squash." For a moment, The Bloodbottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off track. That is the scrumptious snozzcumber, he said, eyes guzzling it gleefully every night and every day. Is you never trying a snozzcumber Bloodbottler? Human beings is juicier, the Bloodbottler said. You was talking rummy tot, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if he could only get the Bloodbottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG said, but please, when you see how truly grumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. The BFG stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You's not switch-fiddling me, is you, said the Bloodbottler. Never, the BFG cried passionately. Take a bite. I am positive you will be shouting, oh, how scrumptious and wonder-veg this is. The BFG could see the greedy Bloodbottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthsome to always be eating meaty things. Just this once, the Bloodbottler said, I is going to taste this rotsome eats of yours. But I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I'm smashing you over your sludgy little head. He began to eat the snozzcumber. He began raising it up on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, don't! But that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among its slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted suddenly up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the Bloodbottler bit a huge chunk off the edge. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. There was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch one more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Youch! Roared the Bloodbottler. Ugh! Each! And then he spat. All the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the Bloodclotter. You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetables splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it, yelled the Bloodbottler. That is the most disgustorous taste that I is ever touching my teeth. You must be bungles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off, happy as a hamburger, gobbling juicy human beings. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, said the BFG. It is guzzly and glumptuous, shouted the Bloodbottler, and tonight I is galloping to Chile to swallow few human Chile beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the Bloodbottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in the scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a Chile bean. Human beans from Chile is very Chile. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they wanted to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers. The BFG said, I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They has a nice inky book flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant peoples, shouted the Bloodbottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie? Where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I was so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was in what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filsome snozcomber, and you were inside of it that entire time, the BFG said. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chidler, cried the BFG. You was all covered in snozcomber and giant spit. He set out about cleaning her up the best he could. I was hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'll be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can think of a way of doing it. And that was the chapter called The Bloodbottler. I hope you guys enjoyed.